Alright, I'm back. Originally, I made a video yesterday, but I kept ranting and going off script, and it turned into like a 3 hour video where I could probably smack this down into like 45 minutes where I just um, don't go on to any weird tangents. And for today's video, I was going to talk about Netflix's Avatar, if you didn't already see by the title. And you're going to be questioning, where's it going to go with this? And there's a good reason why I'm going to start with Avatar first. And this isn't going to be a YouTube video essay channel or a movie review channel or anything like that. And the reason I'm actually even reviewing this at all isn't for the sake of saying this is why the movie is good, this is why it's bad, but more on the human side of it and drawing comparisons to real life, where we're going to talk about exactly why I think Netflix's Avatar gets a bad rap. So without further ado, let's get into it, and there's going to be some interesting stuff to discuss. Things first, Avatar, or rather I should say, just, Avatar The Last Airbender. A lot of people are going to say it's going to be compared to, either the original cartoon, which is a bit of an unfair comparison, or the movie Who Shall Not Be Named. I will avoid any mention of that. But regarding the cartoon, there's a good reason, I think, why they made it, and it's not just for money. The entire thing with the live action remake, we see it all the time with the Lion King, for example. They made that movie for, to just make more money out of it and bring it back into a more modern audience. But with the Netflix Avatar, what I like about it is that it's taking the cartoon into another medium, but it's also changing it with some really interesting changes. And a lot of people hate those changes, but I don't think they're bad changes at all. And while there are definitely some things that even I, like everyone else, disagree with, I think that they did a pretty good job with some of the changes they have made. And one of the main things to point out is, of course, being a cartoon, there's going to be some things you just can't do in live action where you can do in a cartoon. Another thing is that the cartoon is just not only are people more animated, literally, but, it's also more of a kid-friendly tone. It's not as dark and gritty, which is where Netflix is going. And again, that's another thing people say is it's not supposed to be like that. The Avatar is supposed to be for everyone. It's supposed to be more of a younger thing, and why would they make it dark and gritty? It's not Batman. And that is a pretty good thing to say for why people may not like it, comparing it to the old show. But at the same time, the fact that it's a cartoon is a bit of a barrier of entry to people. So a more grounded and gritty Avatar, I think, can introduce Avatar to people who have still not seen it, even now after the fact, months after releasing not just the movie, the live series for Netflix, but the years after for the cartoon. And talking about the cartoon, obviously the original cartoon is a masterpiece, and we can't realistically hold it to that standard. Not just because it's too high of a standard, because that brings up the question, why even make it at all? Personally, you know what? I'm kind of glad they did. I think we're still kind of too sour from the movie, and it just striking a bad chord with people. They're gonna say, oh my god, they're gonna do that again. The cartoon was already so good. Why do people try to keep making the same mistake over and over again when they've already caught the lightning in a bottle? And while I discussed the Netflix's version, I think what we can kind of see is um, not only do they change things, but the adaptations they have made, the changes they have made to the original show is either in some ways doubling down on some of the good stuff, but also maybe removing some of the slower pace. Honestly, many of you, if you're not like me, or if you're anything like me, you may not have seen the original cartoon in a very long time. So what we're gonna see is, a lot of people who remember all the good stuff about it, but may not remember that while Avatar does get better in the original cartoon, season after season, it does start a little slow. And part of the, I guess, both problem but also the benefit of the Netflix's version is that they kind of hit the ground running and they just kept running, and it kind of has a pacing up problem in an opposite way where it doesn't really slow down to kind of help build the characters. And for some people, having a slow pace is bad and they prefer something that's a little more quick. Maybe Avatar kind of like did it a little too far, but I think that the way Avatar has made some of the changes is going to be pretty interesting once we start talking about them. So first things first, obviously, right? The original show was a cartoon, and that is, as I said earlier, a bit of a barrier to entry. Even my dad, who loves Futurama and a lot of these other shows that are like super adult and cartoony, something like the original Avatar or Pokemon, he's never gonna watch because end of the day they are kids shows, and despite my parents loving to watch Netflix and YouTube, they're not really much into not just cartoons but works of fiction. Like Star Wars. The latest Marvel schlop. Those are super fictional, and there's other things that are fictional as well that are live action, like Peaky Blinders and in Good Wife, Grey's Anatomy. Those are works of fiction as well, but they're more grounded in kind of reality. So they've seen a lot of, or all of Breaking Bad, Better Call Saul, Ozark, and honestly, those things never happen in real life, but because it's so much more based in reality, they can kind of consume it easier because they can kind of draw more parallels to real life versus people lifting giant boulders out of the ground or splashing each other with water using martial art movements that, to someone not familiar with the original source product, they're gonna be confused as to how the martial arts really plays into it. Those of us who have really loved the original show, we can see how each movement corresponds to a specific type of waterbending move, for example. One YouTube channel I really like to watch all of his videos of is called Over Analyzing Avatar, and he does a really good job of showing like some of the moves, especially in Katara's little book that shows, if you do this move with a kick, it does the water this way versus if you do this move, it does water that way. The original Avatar did a really good job of that. Unfortunately, the new Avatar doesn't do as much with the martial art, but it does still have a lot of great choreography, and the choreography is still something people really love to watch for. A good example is shows like the Netflix's Daredevil and Punisher, stuff like that. Those are also Marvel movies where it's like a character from a comic book going around hitting other people, but they're still more kind of grounded in reality. You can kind of see how their moves actually, work in real life. It's not just, Superman flying and shooting lasers out of his eyes. And they may not watch something like Spider-Man, but my dad has seen Joker I think 3 times because the Joker, while in the comic books he's causing all of this insane chaos that you wouldn't see in real life um, in the Joker movie. It's nothing that's super out there, super wild. So it's a lot more easy to watch for someone who's not really into watching things that are like super fictional and super crazy. Um, and I think some of the biggest strength of Avatar isn't even the choreography or the moves they have. It's more about the lessons, the cultures, the philosophy, and that's something that kind of everybody likes about Avatar, especially the things that Iroh talks about. And those kinds of things kind of resonate with everyone, especially those of an older crowd. So I think going into it, if you try to understand that, you know, the cartoon is for kids, and Netflix's Avatar, since the start, they did say that this is supposed to be for a bit of an older crowd. Not to say that the original cartoon isn't something that everybody can watch, but obviously there's a lot of people who have still not watched it and may think that they're too old to watch it for some reason. That out of the way, I think we can actually start talking about the first two episodes. The first scene of the first episode, I think, is a pretty interesting pilot, going to the parts of the world we didn't see before, like the parts with the Fire Nation attacking the Air Temple. We did kind of see parts of that in flashbacks in the original show later on, and a lot of people did talk about how. It was a lot better when the show kind of showed us that when it was a time for it, and we started with Aang and Katara instead of the Fire Nation attack. And there's a good point. Sometimes it's better to kind of not show all of your cards right away, but speaking from personal experience, but I know this is something we can all agree we have experienced, is when there's a show you really like watching and you try to sit down your friend to watch it with them, because we know what the story is, we're gonna know what's going to happen. We can follow along easier, but there's always going to be that one person who's gonna question every 5 seconds, say, what's going on? I don't understand. Why is the world like this? And while the original show does a really good job of showing you when the time comes for it, a lot of people just don't have the patience for that. They just kind of want their show to just kind of give it to them in chronological order so they can follow along easier. And this is something I'm going to talk about later on, but the problem is not necessarily Netflix's fault or the original show's fault, just that, or in general, I think reading comprehension has kind of declined, and Netflix's Avatar has definitely stooped down to that level, unfortunately. Again, it's not their fault, it's just kind of like humanity kind of going down on a spiral, and I think if people kind of watch it with the new perspective of this new world we live in, we can try to understand how the new show is more keeping up, as they say themselves, with modern audiences. I think that sentence resonates better with what I'm saying here than what a lot of people say about modern audiences being woke and those kinds of culture war words that don't really have too much of a meaning these days, anyways. That's another thing I'm going to talk about later. But I'm just kind of trying to give some context, some kind of planting some seeds, and it's going to start to make more sense as we go a little further down into the story. But talking about which, with this story, it does kind of start with a cool intro that personally I agree with a lot of people. It does start like really dark, and I don't mean in a mood way. I just mean it's just too dark to even see. And that is a kind of a huge problem with this first season. And I hope they kind of like lighten it up a little bit. There are some parts that are going to be a lot lighter, especially during the day scenes, obviously. But as I said before, they are trying to go with a darker, grittier vibe to it. Um, so with the first scene, the guy's trying to blow the whistle in the 100-Year War, and there's going to be a lot of stuff going on, and a lot of more talented YouTubers that have spent their entire lives talking about filmography and doing retrospectives. They talked a lot better about how much better it would be if they did things in a different way. Again, I'm not trying to do a review of Netflix. I'm just kind of sharing my thoughts on this intro. And I kind of want to say, while I don't agree with them, I get it. I get it. Okay, the original show was already made. If you don't want to watch the new one, that's completely fine. The old one still exists. You can stop watching the new one and just watch that one instead if you want to watch the original show so bad. So obviously this is a different show made slightly differently. So I think we just kind of have to put our kind of criticisms aside and just kind of go in here with kind of a more fresh perspective and give it a chance. A lot of people just want to close their mind off and not accept things. And that's another thing I'm going to talk about later. With people just wanting to be closed-minded and not giving things the chance they deserve. And I think that's a little unfair. Again, not because, I made the show, but because I just think that if people kind of embrace that kind of mentality towards anything, just completely forget about Avatar, like don't even bother watching the show anymore. I think the world would just be better if we just kind of kept our minds open to new experiences. Cool. Now, the first episode, once we start getting into it, starts with kind of like the water tribe, or I guess village of mostly children and old people. And that's pretty accurate. That's kind of how it was in the show as well. But I like how they kind of double up on borrowing from a culture of indigenous tribes, stuff like that. You did kind of get that feeling from the original cartoon too, but it's a lot more prevalent here. And as someone who's lived in Canada from a very young age, I've seen a lot of their kind of culture and their stories. I've been to trips where we see how they lived in their buildings. There's this thing called a big house where we can see how they lived, how they ate, and a lot of the things I would see on their walls is very similar to how I would see the things in the show as well. So they did a really good job of taking First Nations items and just kind of giving it a new life in their show. I think, and I don't want to no, I don't know what the reason is, but I think it's kind of sad how I think indigenous culture seems to be pretty invisible in a lot of modern Hollywood, or even just Hollywood in general, unless it's about like cowboys versus Indians, stuff like that. So having them here in a good light, in a good kind of way of expressing their story in a world where they're still using it in this world, which is completely different from our own world, but it's their world and to them it's modern and it's how they use it, is really interesting. I kind of really like how much they, again, as I said before, they double down on it. Um, and one of the things that they included was the old lady who had a lot of wisdom to embark, and she carries herself like pretty much every other old native lady I've come across with in real life. And it's very much indicative of how much the culture is from the show versus real life. And while the other cultures were both in the show and in the original cartoon were more pronounced, we can see how the air nomads were obviously Buddhist monks and Earth is more borrowing from Southeast Asian. It's great to see that the water tribe has so much more nativeness to them, if those are real words. Not to try to sound insensitive, obviously, I don't have all the right words to use, but I'm just trying to say that is a good thing. It's not cultural appropriation. They're not stealing. They're adding to it. They're honoring it. I think is the best thing. And anyone who's seen the original show would know that the word honor carries a lot of weight in this show. Um, Honestly, a lot of people aren't fans of the old lady for good reasons, and that is because she's kind of used as a narration tool. She does a lot of talking, and she says a lot of things that should not have been said. A lot of people who, again, really like watching movies and doing retrospectives and have then spent their entire life studying movies from a more artistic angle know about the concept of show don't tell, and it's kind of sad how this lady in the show is kind of a tool of um, telling things that a lot of people wish the show would just show. That's why it's called a show. But I think it is indicative of the writers of the new Netflix's version not being as confident in their writing, so they have to resort to giving a lot of narrations where the original show did a really good job of showing us or kind of hinting towards things and letting us, the audience, kind of put the pieces together and making us feel like we're the one that kind of like solved it. We put the pieces together and we found out Aang was the Avatar. We didn't have the show tell us, Aang, you're the Avatar. Spelling it out for us kind of spits on our intelligence a little bit. Again, that is a problem with comprehension of people having dropped down a little bit. So maybe people do need it explained to them these days. And that's kind of unfortunate, but again, I don't think that's Netflix's fault. Another thing that's not Netflix's fault is the acting. A lot of people say it's not the best. It seems a little cheesy. It's a little stiff, and you can kind of tell a lot of times when people are being filmed and they know they're being filmed, they don't act the way they would act when they're not being filmed, right? So they just do kind of tense up a little bit. And, end of the day, these actors, a lot of them are kids and they're kind of new to all this. They're not exactly kids we've seen in other shows. I think a lot of them just kind of their intro into Hollywood. So, personally, I think I'm fine with it. I don't expect a 80-year-old man with 5 Academy Awards to play the part of a 10-year-old air monk. So kind of giving kids a chance to build up their place in Hollywood and giving the next generation a chance is not a bad thing. And while we may not all like exactly how the characters were written, it is a little unfair for people to kind of go into the or actors Twitter, for example, and start berating them because their acting isn't up to par. I'm sure for especially a lot of them, especially the younger ones, they'd probably do a lot better of a job than the 30-year-old somethings who are criticizing them online. But that's just kind of how people act these days. Talking about acting, I think we can go into episode 2, which brings us to the controversial modern woke saga. And those are words that have obviously lost any little meaning they ever had. And the showrunners deserve a lot of criticisms for opening up that can of worms, and they continue to fan flames of this culture war we have. That was a lot of metaphors. I'm sorry. What I'm trying to say is, it's kind of sad to see Sokka not be as sexist. As a fan of sexism myself, I was really looking forward to watching Sokka be super sexist and kind of put women in their place. It's my favorite part of any show. No cut needed there. That was obviously sarcasm, but now that we addressed that point, I think we can kind of discuss why exactly I think it's actually a good thing to remove that. And it doesn't really take away as much from Sokka as people actually claim it does. See, the thing is, there's 3 things at play here. One of them is character development. A second thing is real life character assassination, and the third is just what the internet wants to see. First of all, character development. You don't need Sokka to be sexist for him to kind of grow as a person. I'm going to talk a little bit more about this later, but there's also the character assassination. Nobody wants to play a super sexist, huge asshole and on a show. And, like a lot of people are going to, come up with another character for this actor to play in the future, and that character is going to be different. But a lot of people have kind of this mentality of once this person is this character and they spend the most amount of time with this one character or are introduced into the world as this one character, that's just all they will ever be to people. Robert Downey Jr. was, what's his name? The famous detective, right? But people will always only view him as Iron Man, no matter who else he tries to act in movies. And I think that might be, maybe his manager didn't want him to be a sexist in the show to kind of like not hurt his future. And then there's also what the internet wants to see. The internet obviously wants to see, something edgy, super funny, and that's valid. The show really did have its moments where you can kind of point and laugh and have a good time, but again, going to the first thing, character development, being sexist is not necessarily crucial to Sokka. I was fighting a burp there. It was really hard to keep that down. Cool. Now, to kind of give my explanation on this, I think that Sokka being sexist was kind of originally something that was crucial to his character, right? Just like everyone else, if Sokka is not sexist, how is he going to learn to not be sexist in the future and become a better person? Well, I kind of once I started watching the show and really kind of studied it, to be honest, I kind of started to disagree and understand where the showrunners are going with this. Sokka doesn't really need to be sexist, In this show, he has a bit of an ego problem, and having that ego be shattered gives him room to grow. And that, I think, might be kind of what's missing. And just kind of like adding sexism on top of that would kind of make it kind of hard to watch for someone who is unfamiliar with the character and the show. Especially later on when he starts having training montage with Suki and the training shots, and they're having hard hand-to-hand combat. It's kind of like a hard pill to swallow if he was being too combative, literally. Watching him how to fight from Suki is kind of important as not just something that happens in this episode, but is possibly going to happen in future seasons. And not just Sokka, but the entire team Avatar just had to beg the mayor, which is also Suki's mom, that they're not a threat and they're here to kind of help save the world. And for Sokka to just kind of be a sexist asshole to the daughter of the village mayor, well, that's not exactly going to help their cause. So while kind of like the romantic tension as well with Sokka and Suki, having him be sexist is kind of gonna make it kind of hard to watch when you're trying to think, why would Suki be suddenly all over him when Sokka has just been a huge asshole this entire time? Again, in the original show, because there was more episodes, there was more time to kind of give the characters kind of room for them to settle down, meet people, have things happen. But because there's less episodes, there's not time for Sokka to come in, be sexist, not be sexist, move on. So having him have his ego shattered a little bit by Suki showing she's both better at martial arts and cutting up coconuts does a good job of showing Sokka that, you know what, maybe there is a lot more I can learn from this woman if I want to become a better leader. And that's more important to Sokka's character development, is becoming a better leader and not thinking so highly of himself and relying more on other people, especially women, and putting women down and then not putting women down later isn't the most important thing for him. There's so much more he can learn without having too many problems to have to fix, especially when considering that one of the problems with this show is there's less episodes to build up characters. You just kind of have to pace things out normally. Another thing I wanted to talk about is talking about characters is, as I said before, Suki's mom. Um, I kind of liked her. I kind of wish I didn't. I almost wish that the characters were switched between Suki's mom and the Avatar, because Suki's mom is kind of like the village chief. She's trying to protect everyone, and Avatar Kyoshi, who is trying to tell Aang, hey, you should kill the Fire Lord. Is kind of difficult for a 9-year-old who's also a vegan, or 10-year-old, however old Avatar Aang is. So it's kind of weird to kind of have Kyoshi be so stern, and then having Suki's mom, I forgot her name, I keep saying Suki's mom, be so kind of kind, especially since somebody has to have trained the Kyoshi warriors before Suki was old enough to kind of like take that role and become the protector of the village. But you know what? I kind of do like the character. I'm still kind of having a hard time getting adapted to Kyoshi, but I hope I see more of Suki's mom in the future. I think her character was actually pretty well written. Um, and I think that's kind of the first two episodes. It's already given me a lot more to think about than where the cartoon was up to this point in the show, and where Netflix's Avatar kind of did well versus the cartoon is that the cartoon did pick up a little slower in this part, and trying to do a one-to-one copy in a different medium is going to be really difficult. There's a lot of real life lessons to pick up from Netflix's version that have already been taught up to this point. And, I think Netflix is doing a pretty good job so far. And as we know, the world has already changed so much from the time the cartoon originally aired to today's world. Our real life world has changed so much. So, we as people have changed so much. So it's only fair to have, the show also try to change and keep up with us. Those of you who know, Avatar is split up into 3 books, and the first book is about water and the water's meaning, and its symbol is the symbol of change. So I think that keeping that in mind really does help people give it more of a chance as we kind of go along with the story here. Cool. Now we can go into the next two episodes, which I am a little indifferent on. It was great to see Abbott again as the engineer and the secret tunnel people. I think that was pretty cool. There was a important part in the original cartoon where the team stopped Jet from killing a bunch of people from the Firebender town, and that kind of changed instead to Earthbenders in the Marshu. So kind of changing Jet to become a terrorist, but of Earthbenders is kind of like a weird change in position for the show, but it does still stick to the character and the team Avatar trying to stop him, because honestly, two wrongs don't make a right, and that's kind of what the original show was trying to say with that story as well. To some extent, obviously the original cartoon did do a better job of that, but we haven't gone too far off the plot yet. They did a cool part of Oma and Shu being what I think is a lesbian couple that was also, not needed, but at the same time, they were never needed to be a straight couple either. So having them included like that doesn't add or remove anything to the story, but I'm sure to whoever it is important to have that level of inclusion, good for them, I guess. I'm sure they would have been happy to see that. Um, and last but not least, Boomy. Yeah, I'm not a fan of this character. I did really like the fighting scene with the air jump and the kick where Aang did a backflip over the rock with the slow mo. They took that right out of the show, but I think a lot of things people said with the original show was that Boomy did a lot of a kind of a good job trying to tell Aang, remember Aang, you're still a kid, When we met, we were both kids. Chill, have a good time a little bit. Whereas in this new show, part of the problem people have with the new Aang is that he's not a kid anymore. The reason people like the original Aang was that he's a kid, and sometimes he would goof off a little bit. But this new Aang is way too serious, and he's taking it the role of being Avatar way too hard, and for some reason, Boomy is also kind of trying to drive that down into Aang, being, "Hey, why are you being so relaxed all the time? Remember, you're Aang, you're the Avatar. You have to save the world." And I think that's a bit of a character assassination, almost a little bit. Maybe assassination's too big of a word to describe it, but I think, especially with Boomy saying you should stop goofing off, but also keep throwing all these things at him when he already knows Aang is the Avatar, is wasting his time, but at the same time telling him you don't have time to waste. The world needs you. So that's a bit of a kind of like a weird thing they did with him. Um, and then the next episode, these two middle episodes, I don't really have too much to say about them. So I'm just kind of like trying to go as fast as I can with them. The other episodes, I think there's a lot more importance to them, and I think that's a good sign because as we go further in, obviously we're gonna have better writing, and the characters are gonna feel more comfortable with the source material. But the next episode is the one with their spirits. I don't particularly like that Sokka and Katara went to the spirit world originally, but I do like that it gave us a chance to have them give us flashbacks of their mom and dad, and it's not really something we saw, if at all, in the cartoon. The part with Sokka's dad saying that Sokka may not just be the kind of person who's built to be a leader almost probably hit me as hard as it hit Sokka. And obviously, the mom was pretty cool too. Um, and then later on in the episode, I think Iroh and June were playing Pai Show, which was kind of weird. I don't know where they were going with that, but I guess the show was trying to become a more towards a more adult audience with that. So if that's what they're trying to imply, then I guess that's kind of the joke there. And then there was also a scene with Aang reuniting with Gyatso, and I think we can all say that that probably made us all cry. Now, talking about going into episodes really quickly, I don't have too much to say about episode 6 either. We all know how the story went. They did a pretty good job of doing an almost one-to-one. Avatar gets captured. Zuko breaks him out. They talk about their feelings. They become best friend. Not really, Zuko's still Zuko. He'll always be Zuko. At least, for now. Um, he will be Zuko in season 2. He'll be Zuko in season 3. I think Zuko is the person we think of the most when it comes to character development, not Sokka or Aang. So it'll be really interesting to see how his character changes. But at this point, end of the day, he's still Zuko. You know what I did not expect to see in this season is his sister Azula. Like technically, it was also revealed earlier in previous episodes, and I think in the pilot episode as well. But I feel like it's starting to become time to talk about her now. Because honestly, I think she's good. You know, she's not what people expected. You know, I always thought people love getting their expectations subverted, but people online seems to say that she's too fat and a lot of other dumb arguments to make that has honestly nothing to do with the character. I think personally, I was taken back a little bit that she kind of looked so young in the original show because she was so much taller and skinnier. I didn't think she was 14, but Googling it, I found out she's 14, which isn't that much older than Aang, which I also Googled. And turns out Aang is also 12 and not 9. In the original show, you know, because of how much more mature Azula is. I thought Azula is much older, but seems like they're only 2 years apart, which is kind of interesting. So that is kind of canon, I guess, with them being so different. They've had, you know, very different experiences with Azula's dad being much more tough and Aang being raised in a much more loving and accepting environment. And then there's also Team Avatar, and then there's the difference between Team Missoula. Like we can also see Mai and Ty Lee, which are also good to see too. I do like that in the new Avatar version. What we see here is that, you know, they're not just even though they're not already supposed to be shown yet, they're not just faceless cheerleaders. Mai already has voice lines where she talks about or where she engages in the fight with Azula and grabs her hand when she's beating that guy up after she's already won the fight, and when she kind of snaps back against Azula and says, "You know what? At least Zuko's out there seeing the world. If I was him, I wouldn't come back." So that kind of gives you the feeling that even though Mai is pretty high up in the Fire Nation hierarchy, things aren't the best in the Fire Nation. Honestly, with even drawing comparisons into the real world, when it comes to fascism, it's not exactly like people that are living not under the occupation are living the best world either. Fascism affects everyone, even those who aren't the direct victims of it. Not to get political yet, but it's really kind of interesting to see how much more different Maya's character is with Azula, who's totally patriotic and loves everything about the Fire Nation, as is her kind of position to be next in line if things work out for her and Zuko never comes back. But you know what? The my character, I don't know. I just kind of like her. She's emo goth dissociative queen. So honestly, a lot of people are gonna resonate with her. Now, as for Azula, why I decided to bring her up now instead of earlier is because this is the episode where Iroh talks to the crew about what happened with Zuko's face and shows Zuko getting that scar. And this is also a scene that they also showed in the original cartoon as well. We just didn't know who Azula was back then. And I know it's kind of weird for a grown man to say this in 2024, but I kind of wish that Azula smiled more in that scene because watching Zuko get hurt is something that's part of her character as someone who loves watching people get hurt, even if they're someone who's her own family. Obviously, Iroh's reaction was perfect. Iroh, or the actor who plays Iroh, spend a lot of time studying their character. So, honestly, I don't think there was anyone better cast for this character than Iroh. He did do an amazing job. No surprise, given how he does his other performances from other shows. Um, so while we're talking about that scene, there's also two more things to say. I did like the context where Iroh gave their story a little bit more to it. Because I think trying to compare how much things are differently with the show and the live action, um, they didn't really delve too much into why Zuko's even with this crew at all. And giving them this story kind of does really help give that connection Zuko has with his crew that also exists in the cartoon as well. But you get a lot better of a reasoning and community with Zuko and his own crew in the Netflix's version. So that's another thing I think they did a really good job on with the Netflix live action version. So I think I almost want to say a lot of people would probably say that while they're watching the live action, people might try to say, okay, for this part, watch the cartoon because the cartoon did this much better. But this is one of the rare parts where the show definitely did much better of a job going to something that the cartoon kind of skipped out on. And that's just kind of like one thing that I think was really good. Change is change, and while it is a surprise to be sure, it is a welcome one. One change I would say is something I'm not so keen on liking as much is that Zuko fought back. In the original show, he did not fight back at all. Now, honestly, Zuko did resist when it came down to it, and that's why he got the eye injuries because he resisted and he should not have. But whereas with Sokka, I think that him not being sexist is fine because sexist isn't crucial to his character, and Sokka has a lot of things to learn about his ego and working with relying on a team. With Zuko, Zuko's not necessarily a fighter. Zuko's, I think, more of a pacifist who's being raised in a family that loves to fight and loves to bring pain upon people. And so I think that Zuko fighting back here is kind of a bad change on his character. But then again, Zuko is not a bad fighter in the original show as well. He never resisted a fight when the fight was important, and he thought what he was fighting for is right. That's something that is definitely consistent with the show, with the original show and the new live action one. We can definitely see that in later on episodes that haven't been made yet. I can't wait to see the scene where Zuko kind of takes in a big brother role. But the whole scene is kind of interesting to kind of take apart and compare with the original show. I'm not too keen on it, but I understand it a little bit. I'm already running out of storage space, so I'm gonna try to keep this last bit quick since there's really the final two episodes left. Um, Again, the emphasis on the natives is a welcome touch. We have a lot of things that are similar. Paku being sexist, that is important to his character. So it's not exactly like Netflix's Avatar solves sexism and removes sexism from the world. There are sexist characters in the show, and it is when it's important to their character, it is there. And saying women shouldn't heal and Katara wanting to fight instead is definitely something that was a point of contention between their characters. But again, Paku did learn later that Katara has a lot of wisdom, and she's not just someone who doesn't know how to fight and is just being reckless. She proved herself, and she unfortunately didn't get a chance to learn anything in their show because they're kind of trying to cut things down so fast. But it is nice to kind of give Katara a moment to be to say we see you, like okay, you can fight and you can fight well, and we trust you to take a key position in this fight. Not just because we're desperate because there's thousands of ships coming, but because you can handle yourself. So that's a cool part to see. During the fight, I kept saying, like, do the thing, do the thing you learned from the Earthbenders with the rock slides. And when I actually did see her adapt to that, I was like, yes, I didn't think they'd actually do it because a lot of the times waterbending moves and earthbending moves are so different and you can't really adapt too much. It is kind of cool to see that Katara is learning from her experiences living the South Pole and already becoming a better waterbender for it. All right. Going a little bit later to the other side plot, we have the whole thing with Iroh keep asking Zhao for the plan, and Zhao kind of like keeps hinting at it, but obviously he's kind of like being vague, like I'll tell you, but there's people who haven't watched the original cartoon yet, so it kind of makes sense. Well, kind of, sort of, but not really. I'm kind of having a hard time kind of really understanding what Zhao's whole mentality was here, because in some parts it made sense why he would bring Iroh along, but obviously Zhao knows from the beginning that Iroh's not going to be very keen on this. Iroh's a very spiritual person, and Zhao knows that, which is part of why Zhao's even bringing Iroh along, is because Iroh's the best source of identifying what even a spirit is and how to eventually kill it. So Iroh kind of tags along, despite at this point thinking that Zuko is dead, but not really. He's faked his death. So they kind of like try to keep tabs on each other. So this kind of becomes a little bit of a gripe with Netflix again, making changes, the balloon going up and over. It is a bit of a weird thing because we weren't supposed to see that kind of technology yet. But then again, come to think of it, Netflix didn't do a really good job of showing how Zhao even got to that place in it anyways. I kind of had to go back and watch the cartoon, and to be honest, I think Zhao kind of just teleported there. It's supposed to be a sacred sanctuary, secret place, and having Zhao having a plan of how to get there, the show did kind of give a better explanation of how he got there. So it's kind of interesting, but the show kind of did have a bit of a problem with the not having plot holes, I guess. And I guess, going back to think about technology, it actually does make a lot more sense to have a hot air balloon than a tank. In the original show, they had tanks. So we haven't seen any tanks in the live action version yet. And they wouldn't really make too much sense here. At least not yet. Maybe we'll see them more towards later episodes where we see the huge drill. Spoilers, I guess. And I think another cool part is that in the original show, it was just kind of like some grass in the middle of a frozen tundra. Didn't make too much sense, but I think the way the Netflix version did kind of explain a little bit more, with it being a bit of a hot spring instead of, and a lush garden, it does kind of give it more of a understanding of how such a place could have even come to be on the Northern Water Tribe, and why they would build an entire village in the middle of this said frozen tundra. Talking about good Netflix changes, and again, this is what this video is supposed to be about, is the fact that in the original show, they kind of explain how Zhao had somehow found this hidden library in the middle of the desert. And that doesn't really make too much sense, especially how Team Avatar kind of stumbled upon it by mistake, and Zhao had in at least the Netflix version, he had the fire sages embark that wisdom on him. And kind of giving it a little bit more of a thought, it makes so much more sense to have people that study the stars say something that's not really that much of a super secret. It's just about astronomy. How often does the comet go around, I guess, Earth? Is about every 100 years. So that's not necessarily something we need the owl for. I'm interested to see how they would approach that in the later seasons once Team Avatar reaches the library, and if they will meet the owl. Yeah, the owl does come in the later seasons. It's kind of interesting to see that Netflix already showed the owl. And he's someone that I did really like in the original show as well. Didn't really make sense for Zhao to communicate with that guy in the original. So I guess with all that said, the thing is, if you're going in blind, not having seen the original show, you won't have this impossible expectation or knowledge of things that haven't even happened yet. So you'll probably have a lot better of a time watching the new Netflix version. It is a worse adaptation of something that already exists, but to be honest, it does do a really good job of explaining things that those who are familiar with the source product already know. So I think if we all kind of remove our rose tinted glasses and give the show a chance, we can see that Netflix does do a really good job. Minus of the part about Zhao talking to the spirit, and there's a lot of things that obviously, Netflix did a really good job on, again, with explaining the part with the ship and the crew. So, again, Netflix did do some really good changes that I think we all wish they included in the cartoon as well. It is a bit of a two-sided sword, right? Because we have all seen it, we have all gained an appreciation of the original cartoon. So I think going in blind may actually give the show more of a benefit, and especially the cliffhanger where they hint at what's going on next season with Omashu. I think that's a really great cliffhanger, and those who have not seen the original show yet, they're going to be in for a ride. So if you have somehow not seen it yet, and I have somehow not spoiled too many things yet, the best is yet to come, I believe. So a lot of us need to kind of be able to forego our sour taste that the movie Who Shall Not Be Named gave us many years ago. That's not just unfair to the actors and the many people who have worked on the show, but anyone who's going to be a future audience of the show who have not seen it at this point yet. I know a lot of people hate things just for the sake of hating things. I know I've seen comments on YouTube videos back when YouTube did YouTube Rewinds, and some of the comments would be, I don't care if the next YouTube rewind is actually good, I'm going to dislike it anyways. And that's just kind of like doesn't make sense to me. The whole reason we're disliking every single YouTube rewind is because every single one is bad. Obviously, if they make a good one, which I doubt they will ever make again, people would like it. The problem is people have just been soured so much after so many things that they refuse to accept when something finally good is put in front of them. And talking about YouTube, obviously YouTube kind of has now removed the dislike button, and they like to say that it's because it's to protect people from bullying, which is just not true. Those who are getting quote unquote bullied can still see the like and dislike ratio. I think it's really just to protect the illusion of the corporations who are not really caring about anybody else, and no matter what they put, they're just gonna get everything handed to them. And I think removing dislikes is really just to protect the companies, not people who are getting bullied. Those people will continue to get bullied, but end of the day, the people who deserve bullying is corporations. Part of the problem with blaming everything on bullies is we no longer have any accountability, especially for a lot of producers who put out a lot of bad movies that are actually bad. And then they will say, actually, we made a really good movie. It's just the problem is that we're getting review bombed by incels, and that's not necessarily true. People like to blame all kinds of things like, oh yes, racist people who don't like a black Ariel and that's why a movie flopped, or people hate women and that's why Captain America failed. No, it's just because this story is really bad, and if you make a good story with a good main character, it doesn't matter if they're white or black, man or woman, people are gonna like the story. But as long as we have this kind of culture where people don't have accountability and can just say, oh yeah, people just hate things just because, and there's no really any reason for them, is part of the problem why we keep getting so many movies these days that are just worse and worse year on out. Because if they have anything that is not going to be as good as people were expecting, they can just say, oh, actually, no, it is good. People just review bombed it because they wanted to, which is completely a insane argument to try to make. Now, people hating things is their right. I think both Netflix's Avatar is really good and the original Avatar. And you know what? Maybe that isn't for everyone. So, end of the day, it is subjective. But that part of the reason I want to talk about it is because I think that, to be honest, I don't know. So I kind of want to ask you guys, if are we hating the new Avatar because it's different, or because we think it's not good enough? Because honestly, I think it's totally good enough. I had this kind of feeling when I was watching this beautifully directed scene the day after the Fire Nation attacked the Northern Water Tribe. The theme of the original Avatar is very much the same theme of Netflix's version. The theme is change. The theme of the element of water is change. And that is what the first book is about, is book one, water. So being able to have the word and the theme change in front of us and still refusing to accept change is kind of more of a criticism of us on our part than the show. If anything, maybe we need to start looking to criticize ourselves for maybe not being a good enough audience for something. So, there's a lot of other things we can talk about as well. Character development. There's hundreds of thousands of dissertations and retrospectives and video essays all about
character development on Azula, on Zuko especially. I've seen videos that are 2 hours long just on Zuko alone, for example, just on one channel. And I've seen videos on multiple channels on the same subject. And I'm definitely in that weird 1% where I watch almost every single video essay because I've kind of melted my brain and I've gone insane. But that isn't to say that I am expecting everybody to kind of watch those videos. I'm saying that I've just kind of seen all of these different perspectives, all of these different things coming together and talk about the show. There's a lot of love for it, like years after the fact, people are still talking about the original cartoon, even if the movie or the Netflix adaptation wasn't made. And honestly, the main changes we see in the Netflix's version is changes to Zuko's character and Azula. Um, in the cartoon, we see them go through a lot of changes, and there's definitely changes in the Netflix version too. There's kind of like, they're shallow, not really putting too much thought into it, kind of changes. And then there's changes that, if you go one level deeper, we can kind of see that the changes have made for good or worse have been made, and we just kind of have to accept that and hope that we can try to embrace it to be able to go into the future episodes also with a more welcoming and more understanding perspective. I'm not going to talk about any other shows going forward, but I think another good example is Halo. The first season of Halo show was awful. I think everybody agrees that show should just not have been made, especially the way it was. But you know what? I think we can all agree, those 3 or 4 people who bared watching the second season, that actually, you know what, the second season actually is a better season. So maybe we can do that with the Avatar version too. And to end things off, talking about change, as we know from the start, they did want to go with a darker, grittier theme. But at the end of the day, this is a kids show. Just because Katara have water powers doesn't she mean she's gonna create icicles and start to puncture people or start to waterboard people. End of the day, like, waterbenders aren't gonna severely burn people. Even with the scene with Zuko, they did kind of pan the camera away, because we knew from the start going into it this was going to be different tonally. But at the end of the day, the original show was a cartoon, and we have all grown up now. And even Netflix's version, while they kind of tried to say like it's for a slightly older audience, the original audience, who were kids, are adults like me now. And the Netflix's version is still mainly for kids, and the people who play the main characters, even the show, are still kids. We're following the adventures of kids. The show was PG-13, so those of you who are grown adults complaining about how the kids don't look right, or the story is too cheesy and over the top, I think they're kind of missing that important tidbit. So I hope you all kind of have a new level of appreciation, not for Netflix. They deserve, a lot of hate for a lot of the stuff they make, but I just want people to learn this lesson, not from the show necessarily, but at least from this video, that change is going to happen, good or worse. We need to kind of accept change and move with change. And if something changes in the world, We can create a fuss about it and want to complain, or we can try to embrace it and try to adapt to it, at least as much as we can. A lot of the changes in the world are most certainly going in a bad direction. I'm not saying you shouldn't fight to make good change in the world. Um, I try to kind of minimize how many bad words I use in this video, but I'll make an exception here. The word that's become the popular term is enshittification, and enshittification has definitely affected everything from the things we buy to the things we watch. So, unfortunately, I think it also seems to apply to people as well. I think people have also become enshittificated. So try to make each other better, make yourselves better, and if we can all just accept that some things are going to be different, that is completely okay. Let's just try to at least be better to each other. And my last little advice is for the people who make the show. Please, for the love of God, have a little bit of a higher level of comprehension for your own writing, and trust in the audience that their level of comprehension is higher as well. Because even if it's not, people will adapt, people will change, and we can try to become better to try to rise to that level instead of bringing your product down to a worse level to conform to the lowest level of denominator. Thanks. I hope I talked your ears off, and we will come back hopefully soon with another somewhat well thought out video.